What if I told you that buried deep within the ashes of the Second World War, hidden inside forgotten trunks and rusted boxes, lay the handwritten diaries of women who stood between life and death? They were not soldiers, not spies, and not the faces you see in propaganda films. They were nurses, German nurses sent to the Eastern Front, where mercy itself frowned before it could take a breath. Their words were never meant for the world to read. But history, somehow, never stays buried. These are not reports from generals or speeches from politicians. They are the whispers of trembling hands, the ones who tried to hold the dying together as the world fell apart. Before you watch further, take a breath. Because what you are about to hear is not about victory, not about glory, but about survival, fear, and a kind of quiet courage that no medal could ever honor. Subscribe to Warlog, where history doesn't just speak, it remembers. They were barely 20 years old, daughters of bakers, farmers, and school teachers. They wore clean white armbands marked with red crosses, believing they were joining a mission of mercy, not a mission of war. They had been told they would work in hospitals, far from danger, far from the front. It was the summer of 1941 when they boarded the trains heading east. At the station, crowds cheered, bands played, and newspapers promised that the war would soon be over. Among the young women was Anna Weber, a nurse from Cologne. She carried a small leather notebook in her coat pocket, a diary she would one day hide under her pillow every night, afraid someone might read what she truly thought. Her first entry reads softly, "Mother cried when I left. I told her I would be safe. Who would harm a nurse? We are not fighting, we are healing." For days, the train rattled through endless fields. The sky seemed wider, the air colder, and the faces outside the window less familiar. By the time they reached the east, smoke already drifted across the horizon. The villages were silent, the trees black with soot. When Anna stepped off the train, she expected to see a hospital. What she saw instead was a collection of torn tents, cots covered in blood, and doctors shouting over the groans of men. Her second diary entry said only this: "The first man I saw had no face, only bandages where eyes should be." She did not faint. None of them did. There was no time to scream, no time to cry. Within minutes they were handed scissors, towels, and morphine that ran out before the first day was done. That night, as shells thundered in the distance, Anna wrote again, "They told us we were part of something heroic, but I see no heroes here, only boys calling for their mothers." By autumn, the work had consumed them. They learned to walk past dying men without flinching. They learned to eat in silence as the air filled with the smell of blood and disinfectant. They learned to stitch wounds while shaking from cold and fear. One nurse wrote, "The bandages freeze before they dry. The air smells of death and carbolic acid. When I sleep, I still hear the screaming." They hid their diaries under their blankets, terrified that the military police might find them. Writing was the only rebellion left, a way to say, "I am still human." One night, after a bombing, a wounded Soviet prisoner was brought in. Orders were clear: treat German soldiers first. But when Anna looked at the boy, his uniform torn, his hands trembling, she forgot the rules. Her diary whispered, "He said something in Russian. I did not understand, but I think it was thank you. I was told not to help him. I did it anyway." In that moment, compassion became defiance. Winter came early. Snow buried the tents, and wind howled through the cracks. The nurses wrapped themselves in thin blankets that smelled of smoke and iodine. The patriotic songs they had sung on the train were gone. The diary entries became shorter, colder, more distant. "We have no gauze. The men die faster now. I cannot remember the faces of the living." They were no longer healers. They were witnesses watching life dissolve one heartbeat at a time. One evening, Anna wrote by candlelight while the sky outside turned red from artillery fire. "If I die here, let this book be found. Let someone know we tried. We wanted to heal, not destroy, but war eats everything: the body, the soul, and the truth." Her handwriting trembled toward the end. The ink bled, as if the page itself was crying. By the time the next winter came, their hospitals had moved even closer to the front. Nurses vanished during retreats. Others simply stopped writing. The ones who remained worked until their hands bled, until their eyes forgot what rest felt like. Anna's final words in that first chapter read like a whisper fading into snow. We stopped asking for names. The faces came and went too fast. We just held their hands until they went silent. The snow outside was no longer white. It was red. And deep within that frowning silence, these women kept writing, turning their fear into words that would outlive the war itself. This was only the beginning, because soon, the Eastern Front would collapse. The wounded would become prisoners, the nurses would become captives, and conscience would become their final battlefield. The wind never stopped. It screamed through the broken windows of the field hospitals, carrying with it the sound of a war that had turned against its makers. The year was no longer marked by seasons, only by losses. Every sunrise brought fewer soldiers, fewer supplies, fewer reasons to believe. By the middle of that frowning year, the Eastern Front had become a graveyard stretched from horizon to horizon. The nurses who once wrote with neat, hopeful letters now scrawled their words like confessions before death. Anna's diary began to change. The early pages were filled with careful handwriting, little sketches of trees or the cross on her sleeve. Now, the lines shook, the ink cracked under her trembling hand. "We have stopped counting the wounded," she wrote. "They come in by the hundreds. There are no beds left, no bandages. The doctors use curtains, torn shirts, anything." The air inside the tents no longer smelled of medicine. It smelled of rotten snow. The women had learned to wash with melted ice, to sleep standing, to eat only when ordered. Some of them stopped speaking altogether. One nurse, Greta, burned her uniform collar one night. The symbol that once meant pride now felt like a curse pressed against her throat. She whispered, "I am a nurse, not a weapon," and cried as the flame ate the fabric. They began to question everything. The words they had been told, the images printed on the posters back home, the idea that they were fighting for a noble future. Nothing about this place felt noble anymore. When the wounded stopped arriving for a few days, the silence felt worse than the screams. It was the sound of retreat. The German army was being pushed back, step by step, across the ice and mud it had once claimed. And behind the lines, the nurses waited, their hearts pounding with a fear they didn't dare name. Anna wrote, "They tell us to be brave, but bravery means nothing when you are surrounded by dying men. I dream of home, but I no longer remember what it smells like." At night, the ground shook as artillery thundered closer. Sometimes, a flash of light revealed faces half asleep, half dead, covered in frost. One young soldier reached for Anna's hand and whispered, "Will it hurt?" She lied. She said, "No, he died a minute later." She stopped writing that night, and when she picked up her pen again, her words were colder than the air around her. "We are told to treat only those who can fight again. I disobeyed today. I saved a man who will never walk. Maybe that was my last act of freedom." Kindness had become treason. And treason, she decided, was worth it. The hospital commander began checking their notebooks, ordering the destruction of personal writings. The nurses hid their diaries under blood-soaked mattresses, inside medicine crates, even inside the lining of their coats. They were risking prison, even execution, for words. But to stop writing was to surrender what was left of their souls. Days turned into weeks. The snow melted only to reveal the bodies buried beneath it. Anna described it in one line that felt heavier than any photograph. "When the snow goes, the dead return." She began helping civilians polish Ukrainian, Russian people who were supposed to be the enemy. Children with frostbitten fingers, mothers carrying infants wrapped in torn flags. Officially, she wasn't allowed to, but when no one was watching, she snuck them bread, water, medicine. One boy, no older than 12, humped her after she cleaned his wounds. He said something in broken German, something like, "You are not like them." That night, Anna could not sleep. She wrote, "If I am not like them, then who am I?" Her faith in the cause shattered quietly, piece by piece. No argument, no speech, just exhaustion, guilt, and too much blood. By then, even the doctors stopped pretending. They worked like ghosts, hollow-eyed and numb. They didn't salute anymore. They didn't talk about victory. One evening, The sky burned red as distant villages caught fire. The nurses stood outside the hospital and watched the flames crawl across the horizon. No one said a word. They just stood there, their faces lit by a light that looked too much like hell. Inside the tent, Anna tore a page from her diary and burned it. Not to destroy it, but to feel something warm. "We no longer dream," she wrote, "only remember." By the time spring came, the hospitals were collapsing. There were no proper walls, no roofs, no medicine left. They used snow to clean wounds and prayer to fill silence. The Red Army was approaching. One night, the thunder of artillery was closer than ever before. The ground trembled, bottles fell from shelves, and the lamps flickered out. Someone shouted, "They're here." And in that moment, every woman inside that hospital knew their war was over. But the real horror was about to begin. Anna's diary ended that night with a single line written in a shaking hand. The sound of their boots was like the heartbeat of death. The next pages were torn, stained, unreadable. Only fragments survived, half sentences, broken words, smudged ink. "We hid in the cellar. They took Greta. We prayed." Then silence. No one knows how long that silence lasted. Days, weeks, maybe forever. But for the few who survived, their diaries continued years later, written in captivity, in camps, in exile. They wrote not as nurses anymore, but as witnesses to the death of everything they once believed. And through their words, one truth emerges, that even in the heart of a collapsing empire, compassion refused to die quietly. The snow had begun to fall heavier by the time Anna reached the small chapel on the edge of the field hospital. It was once a place of worship, now turned into a storage for bodies. The scent of candles mixed with the unbearable odor of death. She removed her gloves, trembling, and opened her diary again. Her handwriting had grown smaller, tighter, as though each word had to be hidden from the world. "If God still walks among us," she wrote, "he must be walking with closed eyes." That night, the wounded arrived again, convoys of soldiers, half frowning, half conscious, their breath forming ghosts in the frigid air. Anna's hands no longer shook as they once did. She had become mechanical, her mind numb, her heart armored against the horror. But one face broke through. The young boy, no older than 16, eyes glassy and terrified. His uniform was torn, his arm missing. He whispered, "Will my mother know I died a soldier?" Anna could not answer. She lied to him instead, promising that she would write to his mother after he was gone. She did. She wrote the letter as if he were still alive, strong and brave. Then she tore a page from her diary and pressed it inside the envelope, his name written in her blood. In the spring thaw, rumors reached the hospital, whispers that the front had collapsed. The Red Army was advancing fast. Panic spread among the German staff. Some fled west, others burned their records. But Anna stayed. "If the soldiers cannot run from their wounds," she said to Greta, "why should I run from my guilt?" They heard gunfire in the distance, the sound growing closer each hour. Greta prayed. Anna packed her diary in a metal box and buried it beneath the chapel floorboards. "If someone finds this one day," she said softly, "they'll know we weren't all monsters. Some of us were just broken souls trying to heal the dying." When the Soviets entered, they found her tending to a wounded Russian soldier. She was arrested, interrogated, and accused of collaboration. But something strange happened. The Soviet doctor who questioned her read the hospital logs and found her name listed beside both German and Russian patients. He didn't report her. Instead, he quietly told her, "The war is over. Sister, go home if you still have one." She left that night, walking through the ruined forest, following the moonlight like a compass. Along the way, she found the wreckage of an ambulance, its doors open, its cross still painted red. Inside was a single surviving nurse, Greta, barely breathing. Anna stayed with her until dawn, singing softly as the wind carried the echo of church bells from somewhere far away. When Greta's eyes finally closed, Anna took her locket and pressed it against her heart. "For the living and the lost," she whispered. Years later, long after the war, a construction team rebuilding the old chapel unearthed the metal box. Inside were the pages of Anna's diary, fragile, brown with time, yet untouched by the world. Historians were stunned by what they read. The entries told not of glory or patriotism, but of pain, regret, and quiet compassion. Her words became a haunting testimony to the human heart trapped inside an inhuman war. One passage stood out above all. History will not remember our faces. It will remember uniforms, ranks, and orders. But behind every command, there was a trembling hand, a breaking heart. We were told to serve our country. No one told us how to survive our conscience. Those lines were read aloud decades later at a memorial for the nurses of the Eastern Front. The audience fell silent. Many wept not for victory or defeat, but for the simple truth that humanity had survived even in the darkest corners of hell. If you are watching this, remember history isn't just about generals, battles, or dates. It's about people. People who bled, feared, and prayed that their pain would mean something. So before you scroll past another story of war, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what would you have done if the enemy lying before you was just a boy asking for his mother? Subscribe to Warlog, where we uncover not the wars but the hearts trapped within them, because every forgotten diary deserves to be heard.